Great Leap Forward, one of the greatest blunders of human history. It was a catastrophe resulting from a mismanaged economic policy concentrating on agriculturalization, industrialization, and collectivization. Ultimately, the incompetent execution of this counterfeit 5-year plan led to a death toll ranging from 16.5 to 46 million people in a time span of only 3 years. The year was 1958. In the past decade, the Communist Party had risen to power, creating the People's Republic of China, upon the defeat of the Kuomintang, the Chinese Nationalist Party. At the head of the Communist Party was Mao Zedong, commonly referred to as Chairman Mao, a guerrilla fighter, war strategist, a political theorist, and a poet during the Chinese Revolution. Inspired by Stalin's 5-year plan, which concentrated on rapidly enhanced economic production, Mao decided to create his own version of Stalin's economic revolution. This 5-year plan was designed to end Chinese dependence on agriculture and evolve Chinese industry to the point that it could compete with the world powers. Industrial plants were created, and agricultural reliance fell. By 1958, China was earning enough income through its industrial market that it no longer needed the financial aid of the USSR. Inspired by the success of the first 5-year plan, Mao Zedong decided to implement even more reforms in the form of a second 5-year plan. This second 5-year plan, later known as the Great Leap Forward, would be an alternative form to the Soviet industry-based model.
The first step of Mao's plan was to take all of the small agricultural-based collectives and form them into larger people's communes. These communes, instead of concentrating on producing food, would turn their efforts to producing iron and steel in backyard furnaces. To ensure the peasants would do this, a portion of the private food production industry was banned, forcing peasants to instead concentrate on iron and steel. The next step of Mao Zedong's plan was to lead the country into an agricultural revolution. To do this, Mao permitted the implementation of a series of agricultural techniques that were scientifically unproven and unsound. Most of these experiments were based off the theories created by later discredited biologist Trofim Lysenko. The main idea behind these techniques was Lysenko's theory of close cropping, a technique where seeds were planted much closer to each other than usual, assuming that seeds of the same class would not compete with one another for resources. This technique was partnered with the deep plowing technique on the assumption that seeds that were much deeper would have larger root systems. As the result of these two things, the absorption of small agrarian-based collectives into large industry-based communes, and the implementation of scientifically unproven agricultural techniques, the Chinese grain production dropped 15% from 1958 to 1959, and another 10% by 1960, as well as a catastrophic drop in various cash crops, such as raw cotton, which dropped 100,000 tons in production by 1960.
This catastrophic drop in production was worsened by the lack of communication within the Communist Party. This was caused by internal corruption within each level of the Chinese government, from farm managers up the chain to the highest rungs of the Chinese command. This occurred when officials on each level of the government's hierarchy exaggerated recorded grain production to their supervisors in an effort to win their favor and to avoid punishment. This led to vastly exaggerated yearly grain productions, convincing the highest levels of the government that their new economic plan was in fact a great success. Meanwhile, millions of peasants throughout rural China starved.
As a result of this corrupt, mismanaged economic system, China fell into a great famine. Throughout China, millions of peasants began starving to death as a result of mass food shortages. The food shortages grew so dire in some areas that there were reports of peasants even turning to cannibalism. As the carnage amongst the peasantry became more apparent, the Chinese Communist Party continued to ignore the needs of the peasants in an effort to maintain stability and a healthy lifestyle in the cities. This became most apparent at a secret meeting that Mao held in Shanghai in 1959, where he demanded that 1/3 of all available grain be produced from the rural areas to feed the cities and foreign dignitaries, stating that when there isn't enough to eat, people starve to death. It is better to let half of the people die so that the other half can eat their fill.
Ultimately, this splinter of the Chinese government took a 3-year course from 1958 to 1961. In that period of time, grain percentages had dropped over 25% annually, cash crop productions dropped by preposterous proportions, and nearly 46 million Chinese citizens died from famine, internal violence, and purging from the Chinese government. It was a catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions for the Chinese people, and made a permanent blemish on Mao Zedong and his Communist Party.